Welcome to this journey through one of the most disturbing cases recorded in the history of Missouri. Before we begin, I invite you to leave in the comments where you're watching from and the exact time at which you're listening to this narration. We're interested in knowing which places and what times of day or night these documented accounts reach. The year was 1876. The nation had just celebrated its centennial with great pomp in Philadelphia, while in the remote corners of Missouri, something darker was taking root in the shadow of the Ozark Mountains. In a place known as Crow Hollow, a small settlement nestled between limestone bluffs and dense oak forests, the soil held secrets that would remain buried for nearly a century. Ava, the nearest town of any significance, sits in Douglas County, Missouri. Today it's a quiet place with just over 3,000 souls. But in 1876 it was even smaller, a collection of wooden structures, a general store, 2 churches, and scattered homesteads, connected by dirt roads that turned to mud with every rainfall. Crow Hollow itself wasn't much more than a name given to a depression in the land about 7 miles southeast of Ava proper, where several families had established homesteads near a creek that locals called Finley Branch. The first unusual occurrence was noted in the diary of Dr. Thaddeus Blackwood, the only physician serving the greater Ava region at that time. His journal entry from April 17, 1876 reads, "Called to the Thorne residence again. The third visit. This month, Mrs. Thorne exhibits the same symptoms as before: dilated pupils, incoherent speech, trembling in the extremities. Mr. Thorne insists it is a nervous condition. I am no longer certain." This seemingly routine medical observation would later be recognized as the first documented evidence of something deeply wrong in Crow Hollow. The Thorne family, Isaiah, his wife Margaret, and Isaiah's brother Jeremiah, had moved to the area just 2 years prior from Pennsylvania. They purchased 70 acres of land, built a modest 2-story farmhouse, and quickly integrated themselves into the community. Isaiah became a deacon at the Crow Hollow Baptist Church, a small wooden structure that served the spiritual needs of about 40 regular congregants. What makes this case particularly disturbing is not just what happened, but how thoroughly it was erased from official records. In 1953, when local historian Edwin Winters attempted to research the church's founding, he discovered that all records from 1875 to 1879 were missing from the county archives. The church registry itself had pages neatly removed, as if someone had methodically excised a chapter of history. According to Winters' notes, preserved in the University of Missouri's archives until their mysterious disappearance in 1968, the librarian who assisted him mentioned that the records had been intact when cataloged in 1932. Someone had removed them in the intervening years, someone with access to secured county archives. This suggested not just a historical anomaly, but a deliberate attempt to erase what had occurred in Crow Hollow. The documents that do remain tell a fragmented story. Land deeds show that between January and October of 1876, 11 parcels of land in and around Crow Hollow changed hands, an unusual volume of transactions for such a small community. 8 of these properties were purchased by individuals with no previous connection to the area, all of whom listed the same previous address in St. Louis, 1421 Locust Street. When Winters investigated this address in the 1950s, he discovered it had belonged to a building destroyed in a fire in 1879, reportedly housing a philosophical society about which little information survived. The St. Louis connection might have remained merely curious if not for what a railway postal clerk named Franklin Pierce documented in his personal journal. Pierce, who worked the St. Louis to Springfield route, wrote on May 23, 1876, another strange package bound for Ava today. Heavy crate marked agricultural equipment, but weighed far less than it should. Makes the 3rd such shipment this month, addressed to I. Thorne at the general delivery. A subsequent entry, dated June 7th, noted, "Crate arrived damaged from Springfield. Contents partially visible. appears to be books bound in dark leather and something wrapped in oilcloth. Station master insisted on securing it before forwarding to Ava. Curious smell emanating from within, not unpleasant but unusual, like damp earth and something sweeter. What these shipments contained would not become clear until much later, when a drought in the summer of 1962 caused Finley Branch to recede, revealing something that had been hidden beneath its waters for decades. But I'm getting ahead of the story. By June of 1876, life in Crow Hollow had taken on a peculiar rhythm. According to accounts from neighboring communities, the hollow had become increasingly isolated. Families who had regularly attended market days in Ava were suddenly absent. When questioned, Isaiah Thorne, who still made weekly trips for supplies, explained that a summer fever had confined many to their homes. Dr. Blackwood's journal contradicts this. His entry from June 12th reads, "No cases of fever in the hollow that I have been called to treat. Yet Thorne insists many are ill." When I offered to ride out, he became agitated and said it wasn't necessary. Something is not right with that man. The doctor's suspicions deepened later that month when Margaret Thorne appeared in his office in Ava with bruising around her wrists and neck. She claimed to have fallen from a porch, but her eyes never met his as she spoke. The doctor noted that she seemed absent in spirit, though physically present, and that she repeatedly murmured something that sounded like, "The earth speaks through us now." A week later, Dr. Blackwood himself rode out to Crow Hollow, ostensibly to check on Margaret, but really to satisfy his growing concerns. His journal entry from June 28th provides one of the few first-hand accounts of the hollow during this critical period. Arrived at the hollow near midday. An unnatural quiet pervades the place. No children playing, no men working fields, no women tending gardens. Though all these tasks should be at their height in this season. Called at the Miller farm first, finding no one home, though smoke rose from the chimney and a pot of stew simmered on the hearth. Proceeded to the Edwards place with similar results. Finally reached the Thorne residence where I found Isaiah on the porch as if expecting me. He seemed changed, thinner, yet somehow more vigorous. His eyes have a peculiar clarity I've not seen before. He invited me in, but blocked my path when I moved toward the stairs, saying Margaret was resting and could not be disturbed. From somewhere in the house came a low, rhythmic sound, like many voices speaking in unison. When I inquired, Thorne said it was prayer meeting day, and that some community members had gathered in the back rooms. Most disturbing was what I glimpsed in the front room. The furniture had been removed and the floor covered with dark soil, as if the earth itself had been brought indoors. In the center stood what appeared to be a stone pedestal. Thorne saw me looking and closed the door, saying they were bringing the garden inside as an experiment for growing herbs during winter. I departed without seeing Margaret, convinced something is deeply amiss, but unable to identify any clear cause for legal or medical intervention. Dr. Blackwood's instincts were sound. 3 days after his visit, he received an unexpected caller. At his Ava office, Jeremiah Thorne, Isaiah's brother, who arrived after dark, visibly agitated and demanding privacy. According to the doctor's account, Jeremiah spoke in hurried whispers, glancing repeatedly at the door as if fearing discovery. He claimed that his brother had changed after discovering something while digging a new well on their property in early April. Whatever they found, Jeremiah would only describe it as something that should have remained buried, had become an object of obsession for Isaiah. "He brings it out at night," Jeremiah reportedly told the doctor, "gathers everyone in the hollow to see it, says it's proof of what lies beneath, what's always been beneath. They listen to it, doctor. They press their ears to it, and then they speak differently afterward. Margaret was the first. Now almost everyone has listened." Jeremiah claimed he had resisted. pretending to participate while planning his escape. He begged Dr. Blackwood to contact authorities in Springfield or even St. Louis, insisting that local officials would not understand the gravity of the situation. Before leaving, he pressed a folded paper into the doctor's hand, a rough sketch of a curved object covered in markings that resembled a script of some kind, though not one the doctor recognized. Dr. Blackwood, still uncertain of what exactly was happening but sufficiently alarmed, composed a letter to the county sheriff the following day. That letter never arrived. The doctor's final journal entry, dated July 3rd, reads, "Jeremiah Thorne found dead on the road to Springfield this morning. Horse threw him, according to witnesses, struck his head on a rock. Very convenient timing. I no longer feel safe. Will depart for my brother's home in Illinois tomorrow. Left notes of my concerns with Reverend Stern. God help the people of Crow Hollow." By July, the transformation of Crow Hollow was complete, though largely unnoticed by the wider world. The summer of 1876 was particularly hot and dry in Missouri, and most people were concerned with their crops and livestock. Few paid attention to the fact that the small Baptist church in the hollow had stopped ringing its bell on Sundays. On July 17th, Reverend Malachi Stern from the main Baptist church in Ava rode out to Crow Hollow, concerned by the absence of Deacon Thorne and his congregation. His account, preserved in a letter to the Regional Baptist Association, described a scene of abandonment. The church stood empty, dust gathering on the pews. The Bible lay open on the pulpit to the book of Revelation. When I called at the Thorne residence, I was met with cold reception. Isaiah appeared gaunt, his eyes sunken, yet he moved with a strange energy. He informed me that the congregation had decided to worship in their own way and requested that I respect their privacy in this matter. I departed with unease in my heart. What Reverend Stern did not include in his official letter, but later confided to his wife in private correspondence, found among her effects after her death in 1912, was that he had seen other concerning signs during his visit. Behind the Thorne house, he noticed freshly turned earth in a large rectangular area, as if a substantial garden had recently been planted, yet nothing grew there. More disturbing was what he glimpsed through a window as he departed, a group of at least a dozen people standing in a circle in the Thornes' front room, swaying slightly, their arms outstretched toward something in the center that the Reverend could not see. Stern's unease was justified. 3 days after his visit, a farmer named Joseph Miller, whose property bordered Crow Hollow, reported to the Douglas County Sheriff that he had heard unearthly sounds coming from the hollow at night, not like any animal known to these parts, but something between a wail and a chant. Sheriff William Dougherty rode out to investigate, but found nothing amiss during his daylight visit. Isaiah Thorne assured him that perhaps Miller had heard a group of men clearing a new field, singing work songs to pass the time. The sheriff, with no evidence of wrongdoing and multiple responsibilities elsewhere in the county, accepted this explanation. It was the last official visit to Crow Hollow for nearly 2 months. What happened during those months can only be pieced together from fragments of evidence that survived the systematic erasure that followed. A merchant's ledger from Ava shows that Isaiah Thorne's purchases changed dramatically. Instead of the usual farm supplies and household necessities, he began buying large quantities of candles, salt, unusual herbs from the apothecary, and on 3 occasions, large amounts of butcher's meat, despite the Thornes having their own livestock. The ledger also notes an unusual conversation overheard by the merchant's wife. On August 12th, Thorne was accompanied by another man from the hollow, Samuel Edwards. While Thorne conducted business, Edwards reportedly engaged in conversation with another customer, telling them that the people of Crow Hollow had found the true path, and that the old gods speak from beneath the earth. When questioned further, Edwards became guarded and rejoined Thorne, who seemed displeased by the interaction. Then there was the matter of the stone. August shipping records from the nearest quarry indicate a delivery of limestone blocks to Crow Hollow, an unusual expense for a farming community. The quarry owner's son, interviewed by Edwin Winters in 1954, recalled his father mentioning the strange specifications demanded by Thorne. Each block had to be of uniform size and free from any Christian symbols, as the quarry sometimes included small crosses on stones destined for church projects. The elder quarryman had found the request peculiar enough to remember decades later. What these stones were used for would remain unknown until the chance discovery made in 1962. By September, even the most disinterested observer would have noticed that something was wrong in Crow Hollow. No one from the community attended the Harvest Festival in Ava, an annual tradition that typically brought people from miles around. Smoke rose continuously from multiple points in the hollow, visible from neighboring ridges, yet no one seemed to be tending fields or livestock. A peddler who traveled through the region in late September reported to the general store owner in Ava that he had bypassed Crow Hollow entirely after finding the road blocked by felled trees. From a nearby ridge, he observed what appeared to be extensive digging operations throughout the hollow, with mounds of earth piled beside deep pits. Most peculiar was his claim that the digging appeared to be following a pattern, concentric, circles emanating from a central point near Finley Branch. Joseph Miller, the neighboring farmer who had reported strange sounds earlier, made one final contribution to the historical record before his own disappearance in early October. In a letter to his brother in Kentucky, dated September 28, 1876, he wrote, "I can no longer sleep at night. The sounds from the hollow have changed. There are voices now, many voices, speaking in unison words I cannot understand. And worse, there is movement in the woods at the edge of my property, dark figures that stand and watch. Yesterday I found strange markings carved into the trunk of an oak tree at my property line, like a serpent coiled around itself. I have decided to ride to Springfield and bring back authorities with more power than our local sheriff. Something unholy has taken root here, and I fear for my soul if I remain." The letter continues, revealing details not shared with local authorities. 2 nights past, I witnessed a procession moving from the hollow toward the creek. They carried torches and moved in single file, perhaps 20 or more people. At their head walked Isaiah Thorne, bearing something in his arms wrapped in cloth. They gathered at the creek and remained until dawn, chanting continuously. I could not distinguish the words, but the cadence was unlike any prayer or hymn I know. When they departed at first light, the object Thorne carried was no longer with him. I believe they have buried something in the stream bed, something they worship. God forgive me for my cowardice in not confronting this evil sooner. Miller never reached Springfield. His horse was found wandering near the road, saddled but riderless, 3 days later. A search party organized by Sheriff Dougherty found no trace of the farmer. This disappearance finally prompted a more thorough investigation. On October 7, 1876, Sheriff Dougherty, accompanied by 4 deputies and Reverend Stern, rode into Crow Hollow with the intention of conducting a complete search of the area. What they found, or didn't find, was documented in the sheriff's official report, one of the few primary documents to survive the later purge of records, arrived at Crow Hollow at approximately 10 o'clock in the morning. The settlement appeared deserted. No smoke from chimneys, no livestock in pens or fields. The doors to all residences stood open, as if the occupants had just stepped out. Inside the homes we found meals half-eaten on tables, beds unmade, clothing still hanging to dry. There was no sign of violence or struggle, merely an impression of sudden departure. Most disturbing was the church, where we discovered strange symbols painted on the walls and floor in a substance that appeared to be animal blood. The Bible had been removed from the pulpit, and in its place stood a crude stone carving resembling a serpent. The report continues. We proceeded to the Thorne residence, which, unlike the others, showed signs of recent occupation. A fire still smoldered in the hearth. In the cellar, we discovered a tunnel dug into the earth approximately 4 feet in diameter, extending beyond the range of our lanterns. Due to concerns about structural stability, we did not explore further, but noted that a draft of air came from within, suggesting it connected to another space. We have established a perimeter around the hollow and sent for assistance from the state authorities. What the sheriff omitted from his official report, but later confided to Reverend Stern, as recorded in the Reverend's private journal, was the discovery of a leather-bound book in Isaiah Thorne's bedroom. The book, which appeared quite old, was written in a language neither man recognized, interspersed with drawings of serpents in various poses. Most disturbing were the recent annotations in English in the margins, apparently in Thorne's handwriting, including phrases like "the way beneath," "ascension through the soil," and repeated references to the Ancient One who waits in darkness. Also, unmentioned in official documents was what the search party found at Finley Branch. At a point where the stream widened into a small pool, they discovered a stone structure partially submerged in the water, a platform of some kind supported by columns, with a central depression. Around this structure, the ground had been packed, hard as if by the pressure of many feet, and in the surrounding mud they found dozens of small objects, animal bones, ceramic shards inscribed with unfamiliar symbols, and small figurines carved from wood and bone depicting serpent-like forms. That assistance never arrived in any meaningful way. When representatives from the state finally responded 2 weeks later, they conducted a cursory investigation and declared the matter a case of community migration, suggesting that the residents had simply decided to move elsewhere and had left in a disorganized fashion. The tunnel was dismissed as an unfinished root cellar or storm shelter. This explanation satisfied no one who had seen Crow Hollow firsthand, but without evidence of a crime and with no bodies or reported victims beyond the missing Joseph Miller, who might, officials suggested, have simply fallen from his horse and wandered off, disoriented. There was little basis for further investigation. The Baptist Association took possession of the church property, boarded up the building, and eventually dismantled it in 1880, using the lumber to expand the main church in Ava. The other properties in Crow Hollow were reclaimed by the county for unpaid taxes and eventually resold, though many remained vacant for years. And so the mystery of Crow Hollow might have remained buried forever, dismissed as an odd footnote in local history, if not for the drought of 1962. That summer was the driest on record for the region. Finley Branch, which ran through what had once been Crow Hollow, shrank to a trickle, revealing sections of streambed that had been submerged for generations. It was there that a local teenager, Raymond Collins, searching for arrowheads, discovered something protruding from the mud, something that would reignite interest in the long-forgotten events of 1876. What Collins found was a stone tablet, approximately 2 feet square, carved with intricate symbols surrounding a central image of a serpent devouring its own tail. The tablet was remarkably well preserved, protected from erosion by the mud that had covered it for decades. Along the edge of the tablet, barely visible, was a series of names, some recognizable from land records as residents of Crow Hollow in 1876. Collins brought his find to Walter Jenkins, his history teacher at Ava High School. Jenkins, recognizing the potential historical significance, contacted Edwin Winters, the local historian who had previously encountered the gap in church records. Together, Jenkins and Winters began a more thorough investigation of the former settlement. With the streambed abnormally low, they were able to follow it through the heart of what had once been Crow Hollow. What they discovered was a series of stone foundations, not of houses, which would have been built primarily of wood in that era, but of something else entirely. The foundations formed concentric circles centered on what appeared to be a stone altar. Around this central structure, they found smaller stone platforms at regular intervals. The arrangement suggested a ceremonial site that had been deliberately constructed in the stream bed, designed to be partially submerged under normal conditions. Winters documented their findings meticulously, taking photographs and making sketches of the site layout. His notes, later published in the Journal of Ozark Folklore, 1963, described the central altar as bearing signs of intense heat, as if fires had burned upon it repeatedly. He also noted unusual staining on the stone that chemical analysis later suggested was consistent with animal blood. Perhaps most significant was what Winters discovered embedded in the central altar stone, a small cavity containing a glass vial. Inside the vial was a tightly rolled piece of parchment bearing a message written in what appeared to be Isaiah Thorne's handwriting. "We have made communion with what dwells beneath. We go now to prepare the way elsewhere. When the waters recede again, the faithful will return. The serpent is patient." The discovery prompted a more formal archaeological investigation conducted by a team from the University of Missouri. Their work, which continued intermittently until 1965, revealed even more disturbing details about what had occurred in Crow Hollow. The Archeological report, submitted in 1966 but strangely never published in full, concluded that the site showed evidence of ritualistic activity consistent with certain esoteric practices documented in isolated communities during the post-Civil War period. The report specifically noted similarities to cult activities recorded in parts of Louisiana and Appalachia involving earth worship and serpent symbolism. Dr. Eliza Montgomery, the lead archaeologist, wrote in her field notes, which, unlike the official report, survived in the university archives. The site suggests a sophisticated understanding of ritual space. The concentric arrangement, with increasingly restricted access as one moves toward the center, mirrors sacred sites found in ancient cultures worldwide. What's remarkable is how recently this was constructed, and by individuals with presumably traditional Christian backgrounds. The speed of this transformation suggests either a pre-existing hidden belief system suddenly brought to light, or an extraordinarily powerful catalyzing event. Most significantly, the archaeological team discovered a network of tunnels beneath the stream bed, tunnels that had been intentionally flooded when a small man-made dam was constructed downstream. The tunnels connected to larger chambers carved from the limestone that underlies much of the region. In one of these chambers, they found the remains of the original church bell from the Crow Hollow Baptist Church, along with fragments of what appeared to be religious texts that had been deliberately defaced. Dr. Montgomery's notes describe the tunnels in detail. Extensive network far beyond what a small community could have reasonably constructed in the time frame indicated by historical records. Some sections appear much older, possibly natural caverns that were enlarged and connected. The walls in the deeper chambers bear carvings distinct from those found at the surface site, less refined but somehow more disturbing. They depict a large serpent-like entity emerging from beneath the earth, with human figures prostrating themselves before it, or in some cases being absorbed into its form. What was notably absent from the site was any evidence of human remains. Despite extensive excavation, no burials were discovered, unusual for a settlement of that size over that period, when home burials were still common. This absence led to speculation that remains might have been interred elsewhere, or that the inhabitants had indeed left the area as the official record suggested. But if they left, where did they go? This question led Edwin Winters to expand his research beyond Douglas County. After years of painstaking work tracing land records, birth certificates, and census data, he published his findings in a monograph titled The Displaced of Crow Hollow, 1968. Winter's research revealed something extraordinary. Between 1877 and 1880, individuals bearing the names of Crow Hollow residents appeared in records across at least 7 states, from Louisiana to Oregon. In each case, these individuals established small, isolated communities in remote areas. In 3 documented instances, these communities also disappeared under mysterious circumstances within a decade. The most notable was a settlement called New Eden in rural Washington state, which was abandoned abruptly in 1887 after reports of unusual religious practices drew the attention of authorities. A newspaper account from the time described the discovery of a stone structure built partially underground, adorned with carvings of serpents and inscribed with unknown symbols. The implication was clear. Whatever had taken root in Crow Hollow had not died there but had spread, establishing new outposts across the American frontier. Winters tracked the dispersal pattern meticulously. Isaiah and Margaret Thorne appeared in land records in Wyoming Territory in 1878, where they purchased a remote parcel near what is now Bighorn National Forest. By 1882, they had gathered around them a community of approximately 30 individuals. County records indicate that in 1883, local authorities investigated the settlement after reports from hunters about strange structures and nighttime gatherings, but found nothing conclusive to warrant intervention. The settlement appears to have dissolved around 1885, with the Thornes and several others moving once again, this time to Northern California. There, the trail grows cold, though Winters noted a curious report in an 1890 San Francisco newspaper about a cult of serpent worshippers discovered in a remote area of Humboldt County whose leader bore the name Isaiah and claimed to communicate with ancient beings that dwell beneath the earth. The Samuel Edwards family, also from Crow Hollow, resurfaced in Louisiana in 1877, settling in the Bayou country west of New Orleans. Within 2 years, Edwards had become a controversial figure in the region, known for promoting what local newspapers described as a syncretic faith combining Christian elements with older traditions. He attracted followers primarily among isolated communities in the swamplands, away from mainstream religious institutions and government oversight. A parish record from 1881 notes complaints about Edwards's group engaging in nighttime rituals involving animal sacrifice and unusual chanting. Before authorities could investigate fully, Edwards and his core followers reportedly departed the area, leaving behind crude stone structures bearing serpent imagery similar to that found in Crow Hollow. The final piece of the puzzle came from an unexpected source. In 1967, a woman named Eleanor Thorne, claiming to be a descendant of Isaiah Thorne's brother who had remained in Pennsylvania, contacted Winters after reading about his research. She possessed a series of letters sent by Isaiah to his family between 1874 and 1876, letters that grew increasingly strange and disturbing over time. The early correspondence described the challenges of establishing a new farm and Isaiah's work with the church. But by late 1875, the tone had changed dramatically. Isaiah wrote of discoveries made beneath the soil and truths older than the Word of God. He described dreams in which the great serpent speaks wisdom to those who will listen, and referred repeatedly to the renewal that comes from below. Eleanor Thorne also shared family stories passed down through generations, stories never before documented. According to family lore, Isaiah had always been a troubled, searching soul, even in Pennsylvania. As a young man, he had briefly associated with an obscure philosophical society in Philadelphia that studied ancient religions and mystical traditions. His family had hoped that moving west and establishing a respectable position as a church deacon would settle his restless nature. Instead, it seemed to have provided him with the opportunity to fully embrace whatever alternative beliefs he had been harboring. The final letter, dated September 1876, contains perhaps the most chilling passage. We have heard the voice from the earth and are answered. The old ways were built on lies. The serpent brings truth. It moves through us now. We are becoming something glorious and terrible. Do not mourn for us when you hear what has happened. We have not perished, but transformed. We go now to prepare other gardens for the seed we carry. Winters verified the authenticity of the letters through handwriting comparison with Isaiah Thorne's signature on land deeds. He published transcripts in his monograph, though the originals were reportedly donated to the University of Missouri's special collections. However, when researchers attempted to access them in 1969, the university claimed they had been misplaced during a reorganization of the archives. This convenient disappearance of evidence has been a recurring theme in the Crow Hollow case. Following the archaeological investigation, the site was flooded when heavy rains returned to the region in 1966. Subsequent attempts to relocate the stone structures have been unsuccessful, leading some to speculate that they were deliberately demolished or removed. Dr. Montgomery, who led the archaeological team, expressed frustration about this in a private letter to a colleague in 1967, writing, "I cannot escape the feeling that our work is being deliberately obscured. Key artifacts have vanished from storage, field notes have been altered, and sections of the site that we documented thoroughly are now somehow absent when revisited. Someone does not want this story told." Edwin Winters himself became increasingly paranoid in his final years, claiming that he was being followed and that his research materials were being tampered with. In a journal entry dated March 1968, just 2 months before his death, he wrote, "I believe I am being watched. Twice this week, I've noticed the same car parked across from my house. Yesterday, returning home, I found my front door unlocked, though. I distinctly remember securing it. Inside, nothing seemed disturbed, but the air held an unfamiliar scent, something earthy and sweet. It reminded me of what Dr. Blackwood described in his account of the Thorne residence. I fear they have found me." Winters died in a house fire in 1968, just months after publishing his monograph. The fire destroyed most of his personal papers and research notes. The official cause was listed as an overturned kerosene lamp, but those who knew Winters noted that he had switched to electric lighting years earlier. Walter Jenkins, who had assisted in the initial investigation of the streambed site, resigned from his teaching position abruptly in 1967 and moved to California, refusing to discuss the Crow Hollow case further. In a brief interview with a local newspaper before his departure, he stated only that some things should remain buried and advised others to let sleeping serpents lie. A former student of Jenkins later claimed that the teacher had confided in him about a strange encounter at the archaeological site. According to this account, Jenkins had been alone at the site one evening, documenting some newly uncovered carvings, when he heard a sound like many voices whispering together, coming from one of the tunnels. When he aimed his flashlight into the darkness, he claimed to have seen something moving that should not move, stone flowing like water, taking forms that made no sense. Jenkins reportedly fled the site and never returned alone. Raymond Collins, who discovered the stone tablet, reportedly suffered from nightmares for years afterward. In 1969, at the age of 25, he was committed to the State Psychiatric Hospital after an incident in which he was found carving serpent symbols into the walls of his bedroom with a hunting knife. According to hospital records, he repeatedly claimed that he could hear them moving underground and that they're still down there waiting to rise again. During his treatment, Collins produced dozens of drawings depicting what he described as visions that came to him at night. Many showed underground chambers where human figures with serpentine features performed rituals around stone altars. Others depicted a massive serpent-like entity emerging from beneath the earth, its body composed of hundreds of intertwined human forms. The hospital staff attributed these disturbing images to psychosis, possibly triggered by Collins's involvement. With the archaeological findings, Collins remained institutionalized until 1972, when he was released into the care of relatives in another state. He reportedly never returned to Missouri and refused to discuss the Crow Hollow incident for the remainder of his life. The stone tablet itself, the only physical evidence that remained easily accessible, was kept in a display case at the Ava Public Library until 1968, when it was stolen during a break-in where nothing else was taken. It has never been recovered. A curious footnote to this theft emerged years later when a former library employee claimed in a local history newsletter that in the weeks leading up to the break-in, several strangers had visited the library specifically to view the tablet. These visitors, described as scholarly types who claimed to be from various universities, spent hours studying the artifact, taking notes and photographs. None left contact information, and attempts to verify their institutional affiliations proved fruitless. By 1969, almost all physical evidence and many of the primary documents related to Crow Hollow had vanished. What remains are fragments, copies of Winter's publications, a few photographs of the stream bed site, scattered newspaper accounts, and local stories that have evolved into something approaching folklore. During the final phase of the Archeological's excavation in 1965, before the site was flooded, the team uncovered what may have been the most significant find of all, though it was documented only briefly before disappearing from the record. In a chamber deep within the tunnel network, they discovered a small stone box sealed with an unusual resinous substance. Inside was an object described in Dr. Montgomery's field notes as a carved stone cylinder, approximately 8 inches in length, covered in symbols similar to those found on the tablet, but more extensive and refined. The cylinder was sent to the university for analysis, but no official report on it was ever published. Dr. Montgomery's notes indicate that she believed the object predated the Crow Hollow settlement by centuries, suggesting that whatever Isaiah Thorne had discovered on his property in 1876 was genuinely ancient, perhaps belonging to an indigenous culture previously unknown to archaeologists. A laboratory technician who briefly worked with the artifact later claimed that, under magnification, the symbols revealed an extraordinary level of detail impossible to achieve with the tools available to 19th century settlers. More disturbing was his assertion that when placed in water, the stone emitted a faint luminescence and the carvings appeared to shift subtly, as if the serpent forms were moving across the surface. Today, the area once known as Crow Hollow lies beneath the waters of a small reservoir created in the 1970s as part of a flood control project. The official maps no longer bear the name. To visit the site, one would need to take Highway 5 south from Ava for about 4 miles, then turn east onto County Road 94 and continue for approximately 3 miles until reaching the reservoir. Locals claim that on particularly still nights, when the water is calm, strange sounds can sometimes be heard coming from beneath the surface, sounds described as like many voices whispering together. Fishermen occasionally report unusual disturbances in the water and claim that fish caught near the center of the reservoir often appear deformed or diseased. A park ranger who worked at the reservoir in the 1980s reported finding strange carvings on trees near the shoreline, serpent symbols similar to those described in historical accounts. The carvings would appear overnight and be discovered during morning patrols, though no visitors were observed making them. Eventually, the affected trees were removed, and security patrols were increased, though officially for routine maintenance and vandalism prevention. Is there any truth to these reports? It's impossible to say with certainty. What we do know is that something happened in Crow Hollow in 1876, something that a significant number of people went to great lengths to conceal. The systematic removal of records, the disappearance of evidence, and the reluctance of authorities to investigate thoroughly all suggest a deliberate attempt to erase this chapter of history. In 1979, a retired University of Missouri faculty member named Dr. Harold Sumner, who had been peripherally involved with the archaeological investigation, published a paper in an obscure academic journal titled Serpent Cults in American History: Continuity and Disruption. In it, he proposed that the events at Crow Hollow represented not an isolated incident, but part of a larger pattern of esoteric religious practices that had existed in America since colonial times. Sumner's thesis was that certain pre-Christian beliefs centered around serpent worship had survived in isolated pockets throughout American history, occasionally emerging into public view before being suppressed or driven underground again. He cited instances from New England in the 1690s, the Ohio Valley in the 1820s, and several cases in the post-Civil War period, including Crow Hollow. What made the Crow Hollow case unusual, according to Sumner, was not the belief system itself, but the apparent catalyst, some physical object or discovery, that rapidly accelerated the conversion process. He speculated that Isaiah Thorne might have discovered an artifact from an ancient indigenous culture that practiced serpent worship, and that this discovery somehow facilitated the spread of those beliefs to his community. The paper attracted little attention at the time and was largely dismissed by mainstream historians. Sumner himself died in 1981, and his personal papers, which reportedly contained much more extensive research on the topic, were donated to a university archive where they remain uncatalogued and inaccessible. Perhaps most disturbing of all are the implications of Edwin Winter's research into the dispersion of the Crow Hollow residents. If his findings are accurate, the beliefs and practices that took root in that small Missouri hollow didn't die there, but spread across the country, establishing new outposts in isolated areas where they could continue undisturbed. This pattern of dispersion and re-establishment appears to have continued beyond the initial wave Winters documented. In 1962, the same year the drought revealed the Crow Hollow site, authorities in rural Idaho investigated a small community whose members traced their lineage to founders who had arrived from California around 1900. The investigation was prompted by reports of unusual religious practices involving serpent imagery and nocturnal ceremonies. According to newspaper accounts, when state police arrived to investigate, they found the settlement recently abandoned, with evidence suggesting a hasty departure. In a communal meeting house, they discovered a stone altar bearing carvings remarkably similar to those found at Crow Hollow. The case file was sealed after preliminary investigation, with officials citing only inconclusive findings as justification. Similar cases emerged in West Virginia in 1975, northern Minnesota in 1984, and most recently in a remote area of New Mexico in 1998. In each instance, isolated communities practicing what appeared to be a syncretic religion, combining Christian elements with serpent symbolism, were discovered by authorities, only to disperse before thorough investigation could occur. One final note that may be relevant. In the years following the events at Crow Hollow, Douglas County and several surrounding counties experienced an unusual number of missing persons cases. Between 1877 and 1885, 37 people were reported missing in the region: travelers, isolated farmsteaders, hunters. Most were never found. Official records attribute this to the dangers of frontier life, wild animals, and the transient nature of the population during that period. But one can't help but wonder if there might be another explanation, if perhaps those who ventured too close to certain remote areas became unwitting sacrifices to whatever dark belief system the people of Crow Hollow had embraced. A Methodist circuit preacher named Reverend Abner Holloway, who traveled throughout the Ozarks in the 1880s, kept a detailed journal of his experiences. In an entry from 1882, he described an encounter with an elderly woman living alone in a cabin not far from the former Crow Hollow site. The woman, whose name Holloway recorded as Martha Gibbons, claimed to be the only resident of her community, who had refused to join with the serpent people, years earlier. According to Holloway's account, Gibbons told him that her neighbors had begun acting strangely after Isaiah Thorne invited them to see something he had found while digging a well, something old and carved with the likeness of a great serpent. Those who touched the object began to change, she said, becoming withdrawn and secretive, gathering at night for meetings from which she was excluded. Gibbons claimed that in the final days before the community's disappearance, she had hidden in the woods near Finley Branch and witnessed a ceremony in which her former friends and neighbors drank water in which the carved object had been submerged. Afterward, they began digging frantically as if possessed by a single mind. She fled that night and did not return until weeks later when she found the settlement abandoned. Holloway noted that he initially dismissed the woman's story as the product of an isolated, possibly unstable mind. However, he was sufficiently disturbed by her account that he reported it to the county sheriff. No record of any follow-up investigation exists. The last documented connection to the original events came in 1964, during the archaeological investigation. A team member reported finding a small metal box sealed within one of the limestone chambers. Inside was a single sheet of paper bearing just 3 lines of text. "The serpent sleeps but does not die. What is buried will rise again. We wait in the earth for the appointed time." The paper was sent to a university laboratory for dating, but was reportedly destroyed in a chemical fire before analysis could be completed. Like so much else connected to Crow Hollow, it vanished before its secrets could be fully revealed. 1968, shortly before his death, Edwin Winters corresponded briefly with a folklorist from the University of Arkansas who was researching Ozark legends. In his letter, Winters mentioned a recurring pattern he had noticed in the dispersed communities founded by former Crow Hollow residents. They all established themselves near water sources, particularly springs or areas with limestone caverns. He speculated that whatever belief system they practiced required access to underground water or cave systems. The folklorist, intrigued by this observation, began mapping known locations of these settlements against geological surveys. Her preliminary findings, never published but preserved in her academic papers, showed a correlation with areas featuring extensive underground water systems or limestone formations. She also noted that in traditional Ozark folklore, springs and caves were often associated with supernatural entities, including serpent kings said to guard underground treasures. This geological connection might offer a rational explanation for some elements of the Crow Hollow mystery. The limestone formations common throughout the Ozarks often create natural caverns and underground streams. It's possible that Isaiah Thorne discovered such a formation while digging his well, perhaps even uncovering a previously unknown indigenous archaeological site. This discovery, combined with Thorne's already established interest in esoteric philosophies, might have sparked the creation of a new belief system that he then propagated among his neighbors. Yet this explanation fails to account for the systematic erasure of records that followed, the continued pattern of similar communities appearing and disappearing across the country over decades, and the reports of unusual phenomena associated with these sites. Dr. Montgomery, the archaeologist who led the 1960s investigation, remained troubled by her experiences at Crow Hollow for the remainder of her career. In a 1992 oral history interview conducted shortly before her death, she reflected, "I've excavated sites across 3 continents, from Neolithic settlements to colonial outposts, and I've never encountered anything quite like what we found at Crow Hollow. There was a presence there that defied scientific explanation. My equipment malfunctioned routinely. Team members reported vivid, disturbing dreams. And the tunnels, they shouldn't have been structurally sound, yet they were. Some passages appeared to have been melted rather than carved from the limestone, which is simply not possible with 19th century technology." When pressed by the interviewer, Montgomery refused to speculate further, saying only, "Some mysteries should remain buried. I've spent 30 years trying to forget what I felt in those tunnels." In 2002, a hydrology study of the reservoir that now covers Crow Hollow detected anomalies in the underwater terrain. Sonar mapping revealed what appeared to be a network of tunnels and chambers beneath the reservoir bed, far more extensive than what had been documented in the 1960s Archeological survey. Due to budget constraints and the technical challenges of underwater exploration, no further investigation was conducted. A local diver who assisted with the initial survey reported that when their equipment was positioned over the central area of these underwater formations, electronic devices experienced unexplained malfunctions. The diver also described an unusual sensation, a vibration felt rather than heard, like standing near heavy machinery, except we were floating in open water, and so the case remains. A dark chapter in Ozark history that was almost successfully erased, surviving only in fragments and whispers. What actually happened to the people of Crow Hollow? What beliefs or discoveries led them to abandon their previous lives and embrace something so radically different? And perhaps most importantly, did their influence truly end, or does it continue? Somewhere, in some form, waiting as the message in the metal box suggested for the appointed time. In 2010, a graduate student researching 19th century religious movements contacted the Douglas County Historical Society requesting information about Crow Hollow. According to the Society's director, this was the first formal inquiry about the settlement in nearly 20 years. When the student arrived to examine what little material remained in the local archives, she reportedly found the relevant files, missing though they had been verified as present during inventory just months earlier. More disturbing was what occurred during the student's visit to the reservoir. While taking photographs of the area for her research, she captured an unusual image, a circular disturbance on the water surface directly above where the central altar would have been located, visible only when the photographs were later examined. Technical experts who analyzed the image could offer no conventional explanation for the pattern. The student abandoned her research shortly afterward, citing personal reasons. When contacted by subsequent researchers interested in the Crow Hollow case, she refused to discuss her findings or experiences. We may never know the full truth. Some mysteries, it seems, are destined to remain buried, though perhaps not forever. As you drive through the quiet back roads of Douglas County today, past the reservoir that now covers what was once Crow Hollow, you might notice how the water seems unusually still, how the surrounding trees grow strangely twisted, how even the birds fall silent as you pass. And you might wonder, as so many have before, what lies beneath those dark waters, and whether it truly sleeps or merely waits. In 2018, a fisherman at the reservoir reported catching a strange eel-like creature, with unusual markings along its body that resembled the serpent symbols described in historical accounts of Crow Hollow. He photographed the specimen before releasing it, believing it to be some kind of mutated fish. Marine biologists who examined the photograph could not identify the species and suggested it might be a deformed native fish or possibly an invasive species not previously documented in Missouri waters. Later that same year, water samples taken from the reservoir during routine testing showed unusual chemical compositions in the deeper areas, particularly elevated levels of minerals, typically associated with underground thermal features despite no known geothermal activity in the region. Environmental officials attributed this to potential contamination from abandoned mining operations upstream, though historical records indicate no such operations in the watershed. The most recent development in the Crow Hollow saga occurred in early 2019 when a construction project for a new boat ramp at the reservoir was suddenly halted and relocated without public explanation. Internal county documents, obtained through a Freedom of Information request by a local environmental group, indicated that workers had uncovered structural anomalies at the original site, described as stone formations of apparent artificial origin that did not appear on any geological survey. The formations were reportedly reburied and the location marked as unsuitable for development. No photographs or detailed descriptions were included in the official documentation. Is there something still waiting beneath the waters of Crow Hollow? Something that has survived flood and fire, investigation, and erasure for nearly 150 years? The rational mind rejects such possibilities, insisting there must be conventional explanations for these scattered, fragmentary reports. Yet the pattern persists: the systematic disappearance of evidence, the recurring symbols, the continued dispersal and re-establishment of communities with similar practices. It suggests an organizing principle, a continuity of purpose that has endured across generations. Perhaps Isaiah Thorne found something in the earth beneath his property in 1876 that changed him and his neighbors fundamentally, something that continues to exert its influence in ways we can barely perceive. Or perhaps what he found was merely a catalyst that awakened something already present in the human psyche, some ancient tendency toward worship of what lies beneath, of forces older than our brief civilization. Whatever the truth may be, the story of Crow Hollow serves as a reminder of how fragile our certainties are, how easily the foundations of society and belief can be undermined by something glimpsed in the darkness, something that whispers from beneath the earth. As night falls over the Ozarks and shadows lengthen across the waters that cover what was once Crow Hollow, one might imagine hearing, just at the threshold of perception, the sound of many voices speaking in unison, not from above, but from below. A reminder that some things buried do not remain so forever, that some patterns repeat across time, waiting for the conditions to be right once more. The serpent sleeps, but does not die.